Hey, this is Matt from Budget Boosting. Today we've got this 1986 300ZX Turbo, which covers models from 84 to 88. And we're going to show you how to change the front strut cartridges out. And you can see the other video we did on the rear strut cartridges, or the rear shocks, because they're not inside of a strut cartridge, and the springs are separate from them. Whereas the front ones, the springs are together with the strut assembly, and the cartridge has to be removed from the strut assembly. So this is a lot harder than the back. And one of the first things I'm going to show you is, before you take anything apart, check the alignment, because there's an alignment dot right here. Right by this front nut here, the most forward nut to the hood, the most forward nut, there's an alignment dot right on the suspension. That's got to be exactly the same when you put the new strut and put everything back together. And another thing to know about these Z cars is your camber is controlled by how close this is to the center. So you look at the center of your strut right here. The more this goes this way, your negative camber increases. The more this goes this way, the more positive camber you have. So this is a very important alignment dot, because if you get it wrong, you'll have one strut or one wheel positive camber, the other one negative camber, and your car will pull when you're driving. And to see this alignment dot, you have to take this off first. And you really don't need this part, because if you're putting in the factory suspension that has electrical dampening control, then you need this. But all the aftermarket suspension doesn't come with this plug-in. See, you look at this strut here, it doesn't have the plug-in, so it does not have auto dampening, which the factory struts do. So if you're putting in, like, say, Gabriel Ultras or KYBs, none of them have the factory dampening control. So this can just go bye-bye. You can throw it away. You don't need it. See? It just goes clang clang on the ground. You don't need it. You just need this. So without any further ado, we'll get started. First, make sure you get all your tools together. And you got your new parts, the struts. These are Gabriel Ultras. You can buy them at, pretty much all your automotive stores like AutoZone or O'Reilly. Gabriel Ultras, good struts. They have a lifetime warranty, so that's a very good thing about them. And all right, check your tools. Got what you need. And I will begin. First, I'm going to start getting things ready to where I can take the whole strut assembly and bring it out of the wheel well to work on it. So that's what I'm going to do next. Alright, inside here, since I'm going to be bringing the strut assembly out, I need to get these brake lines to where I have plenty of motion to move them. So I've got to get these little retaining clips off. Get the retaining clip off of the brake line so it moves. There's one retaining clip. This holds the brake line in place. So you take that off so we have room to move the brake hose and it's not going to break. Then there's another brake pin or brake retainer clip right here. So we take that off as well, which I just did. Brake retainer clip number 2. Now we can get the whole hose to move, see? So when I bring the strut down, it's not going to pull on the hose. It's going to keep everything secure. Okay, I have to loosen the nut that holds the sway bar in place, and this rod end right here. I got to loosen these two nuts here, so the whole strut assembly will drop down and I can bring it out. The book usually tells you to remove your lower ball joint and bring the whole strut out, but I'm going to do it with the strut still attached to the bottom. It's a lot easier and faster. In my method, you don't have to take the entire strut off and the brake caliper and the rotor and all this stuff. You can just take it out, work on the spring, compress it, take the strut assembly or the strut cartridge out, put the new one in. Easy. Well, easier. This particular front suspension assembly on these Z31 cars, even the S30, the S130, from 1970 all the way to 88, they have this strut in cartridge kind of design where it's a lot of work to change your front struts. Where the rear, you just unbolt them like I showed you on the video, unbolt them and they drop out, put the new ones in, you're done. This one, you got to be very careful of your suspension and your alignment, see? Because up here, if you look up here closely, part of this is more narrow than this. The narrow part has to be on this side because it brings the strut assembly in, keeping your stock negative camber. If you were to reverse this and put the small side out, you'll have positive camber and a wheel alignment issue. So you got to be very careful as to get the small end towards the inward side. The alignment dot helps you on the top, but this part here is a little bit smaller on one location than the other. So you got to make sure you have the most narrow side facing this way and the alignment dot aligned. So the easiest way to do it would be make a mark. And the factory usually paints a dot on the spring, so you don't have a problem with the spring alignment dot. Spring goes here, it has an alignment dot on the spring. This little alignment dot right here, alignment orange paint, to where it faces the most inboard side. So you just want to assemble it the same way that you take it apart to make sure you don't have alignment problems. Yeah, okay. All right, now I'm going to work on these bolts up here. Well, the bolts down here first. So you get the strut. We'll show them these bolts here. I'll show you the bolts we're going to take off next. We're going to take off the bolts that hold this rod right here, 2 nuts, and get that out of the equation, and take this one off here, this nut which holds the sway bar, and these 2 nuts which hold this support brace bar here. And once I take that off and take the 3 nuts off the top, this whole thing's going to drop down. We're going to bring it out so we can work on it and compress the springs, take off the top, take off the strut cartridge, put the new one in, and reverse the process. Sounds fun, doesn't it? It's a lot of work. All right, we're going to take off the little end that holds the sway bar on. That nut and this bushing come off. Keep them together with the other hardware. Nut and bushing and brake clips. Next, a 17mm to separate this bar. This supporting bar right there. 17mm. One more. Just before we remove these top nuts, we want to put a jack under the strut assembly so we can control how slow and how much it moves down, because we only want to bring it down just enough to get it out of the way. So that's our next step. Now I'm going to loosen the top nuts now that the jack is in place and there's tension on the strut assembly. Three top retaining nuts. Okay, now we slowly lower the strut assembly. Then we bring it out so we can work on it. Okay, there's a reason why. Got to make sure this separates. Now we got the strut assembly in position to work on it. It's supported by a little old ammo can. And see how I was talking about before? There's more space down here than up here. That's why it's very precise. Why you have to get this aligned just right. The bigger side is on the outside, the more narrow side's on the inside. This is what controls your negative camber. So we have the alignment dot, and then the larger side is outward, the more narrow side is inward. So you maintain that factory slight negative camber. Now we're going to put our strut compressors on there. So we can compress the spring, take this off, because if we take this off, the spring's just going to shoot off. So we have to compress the spring, remove this retaining nut, then take off the strut out of the strut assembly, put the new one in. So I'm going to show you that in the next little bit. First we're going to compress the spring. You can get all kinds of different spring compressors at AutoZone or O'Reilly or any of the auto parts stores. These are just the ones I have. I'm going to put them on the springs and compress them, so I'll be right back once I've compressed the springs. Alright, as you can see now, I've got one side of the spring compressed with my strut compressor, our spring compressor, and the other side's almost there, because see how I can wiggle the spring? So as soon as I take that nut off, the spring's not going to come shooting in my face. See, I've got it loose enough, maybe just a few more turns. I have the spring compressed enough to where I can take the top off, change out the strut, and not have spring, not injure myself with the spring. So now I'm going to take off the top nut. Okay. Make sure I keep the same relativity. Slowly take off the top. And if you look inside here, it has a notch. A little notch on a flat spot on the top of the strut too. So you make sure you get it in the right spot. Because see, it has an alignment. See? A little kind of a straight edge right there. And on the side of the strut, so you know you get it in the right place. And of course the alignment dot here. We take this off, take out the little bearing, and put it in the same exact position. And then this right here, so you remember where everything goes, and set it to the side. Now we've got the spring compressed. We've already got the tower, the top of the tower and the bearing set to the side. Now we remove everything as easy as possible. Try not to disturb because you're going to put it exactly the same way. Remember inside I showed you? There's a smaller part and a bigger part. The smaller part always goes on the inside. So remember that when you reassemble, the smaller part inside. And the spring also has spray paint on there, meaning it goes on the inside. So you set this to the side so it can't get messed up. Then we take off this boot. We don't need it right now. And now the pipe wrench comes into play because we have to take the strut out of the strut assembly. So we have to take this little nut right here. And unless you have a spanner tool that fits this perfectly, you'll need to use a pipe wrench. See, a pipe wrench can fit the outside part and loosen it. Like I said, if you have a spanner wrench, you can just fit it in the grooves and loosen it, but I don't, so I'm using a pipe wrench. And you take this little screw loose, and you undo it. Undo it all the way, because this is what holds the strut cartridge to the strut assembly. The bugs are out today. Been battling black widows and flies. We just killed one. Then you take the strut cartridge out of the strut assembly. And if you see oil on the strut, don't be alarmed, because you're supposed to pour about that much oil inside the strut assembly prior to putting in a new cartridge. And it looks like I have plenty of oil. Because see, if this was to move from turning the steering wheel, it's not going to create any friction or problems. This kind of helps the process be much smoother. So there's always a little bit of oil inside there, and this is the old strut. I just tightened the retainer to hold the strut cartridge in, put the rubber boot on, Remember the narrow side, the small side to the inside, and red, or the orange dot to the inside. Put it back on. Then the bearing and retainer. Here comes the retainer and the bearing. So everything steers nice and easy. Flat spot has to be to the left. Flat spot to the left, so I have to move the flat spot to the left. Okay, flat spot to the left. Flat spot to the left. Retainer nut. I'll start it with the wrench and then move on to my impact when I'm ready. Alright, we finally got everything tightened. We tightened the top 3 nuts. We also reconnected the sway bar and the crossbar right here. Tighten the nuts. Put the brake retaining clips back on. And now we're ready to put the tire and everything back on, take the car on jacks and test it out. So that's how you change the front strut cartridges in the strut assembly on a 1984 through 1988 300ZX. So hey, thanks for watching Budget Boosting. If you like us on Facebook, like us on our YouTube page, like us on our budgetboosting.com website. Don't forget our Budget Boosting window stickers. And like always, remember, knowledge is power. It's horsepower. Touching up some tired spots on a paint job. Like say your car's been sitting out in the sun a while, and take a look that the clear coat is starting to look not so nice. The clear coat's starting to dry out, and just rubbing compound alone is not going to take that out. You have to take some really fine grit sandpaper, like about 1,000 or 2,000